a small group of people today, so I'm tempted to be somewhat interactive in my sermon. But we're supposed to resist temptation, so I will resist the temptation. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble when you do something that off the cuff. However, I will ask you a question. Of the many things that could be said around the year, about the year 2019, one that can be said is that it is a very special 50th anniversary of something. That was a run-on sentence, but...
Yes, there's so many 50th in 2019.
There are. Okay.
Well,
I'm starting my sermon with one particular 50th anniversary. Go ahead.
I became a pappy 50 years ago this morning.
That's wonderful, but that's not the one that I'm thinking of. Much more worldish than that.
Oh, well, it's Jane and John's 50th wedding anniversary this week.
That's an important one too, but that's not it. I'm talking about world. Nope, but you're getting closer. Vietnam did not start in 1969. Huh? Vietnam did not start in 1969. Earlier than that. 50th anniversary. Nobody knows? I am shocked, dismayed, and horrified.
Oh, it's 69. It's like, what, Woodstock or something?
Woodstock was 1969? Bigger than Woodstock. Moon landing was 69. Apollo 11 was July of 69.
Bigger than that?
Bigger than the moon landing. Yeah. Yeah, isn't it a great way to start a sermon? Haven't I got you all on the edge of your pew? I'm sorry? No, but that's a good one too. It's the 51st. Yeah. Pardon? 1968, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. We were doing other things. Okay, keep going. We're getting lots of 50ths, but you're not. Okay, you know what? I'll let you out of your despair. The Partridge Family debuted. Oh, come on! You're obviously not a guy. No, well, you're a girl. Come on, we got a song that we're singing. Come on, get happy. You didn't have a crush on David Cassidy? Okay. Did anyone here have a crush on David Cassidy? You weren't even born.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Listen to what Marie just said. Everybody's either too old or too young.
I think so.
Am I the only one that's just right? Am I like Goldilocks or something?
Artie would be right in the middle.
Yeah, Artie's just right too. You and me, Goldilocks buds. Yeah, anyway. It's the 50th anniversary of the debut of the Partridge Family. Now, this I want to say. That's the jocular part of the sermon. Now we're going to begin by like a slow process to get a little deeper, and then we're going to get deeper still. Okay, so it's not going to be a joke for the whole thing. It isn't a joke that David Cassidy was the most incredible teen idol that ever was. David Cassidy, at the height of his popularity, was selling more and more popular than the Beatles and Elvis. And he was a teen heartthrob like none that had ever existed before, mostly for girls. And then there was Susan Day. Does anybody remember her? You might remember her from L.A. Law.
Like, that's Angie's daughter. I don't know where.
She was absolutely gorgeous. She was stunning in a very 60s sort of way. She was 17 when she began on the Partridge Family, and she was such a crush. But the thing about a crush, especially like a star crush, is there's no reality to it. Like, the people who had a crush on David Cassidy didn't really have a crush on David Cassidy. And the people who had a crush on Miss Day didn't have a crush on her. They had a crush on their fantasy of who she was. Okay? That's important. That's important. Because as human beings, and as Christians, and here I'm jumping a couple of paragraphs ahead and then I'm going to come back, okay? One of the things we got to make sure of is that our relationships are with real people, not our fantasy of who those people are. Okay? That's an essential. So when young post-puberty or pubescent teenage guys or girls, but I'll speak for guys, would look at a television star, like one of my early crushes was Michelle Phillips. You know, I really thought she was hot. But my first crush was Karen from the Mickey Mouse Club. My crush wasn't on Karen from the Mickey Mouse Club. I didn't know who Karen was. I didn't know her. I knew nothing about her, except what I saw in the Mickey Mouse Club, which I'm sure wasn't who Karen was. Similarly, Michelle Phillips. I liked her looks, but that's all I knew about her. And when we think of the Partridge Family and the two incredible it wasn't on the people. It wasn't on the people. Because he didn't know the people. Like, I didn't know, and you don't know, what these stars are like when they wake up in the morning with a migraine. You know? You don't know what they're like when they've eaten too much Mexican food and have to go to the bathroom every 3 hours. And guess what? They do have to go to the bathroom, even if they're stars. When we have our fantasy about people, we tend to edit out the pieces that we would prefer not to look at, and we tend to glorify or magnify the pieces that we find particularly attractive. In the case of movie stars, it usually tends to be their looks. And so we end up with the cult of the celebrity, and that cult of the celebrity, if we follow it to its logical extreme, can get us as a society in some really deep trouble. So as people, and particularly as Christians, my call this morning is to go within and look at the relationships you have with everybody, not just neighbors and friends and co-workers, but everybody, even your own kids or your own parents or your own spouse, and say, is the person that I know, or I think I know, the real them, or is it a construct that I have created for some reason? Or is it a construct that I've created for some reason? Either to attain something I want to attain, or to avoid something I want to avoid. Now, when we look at Jesus' encounters with people, and the way he encounters people, what you'll see is that he engages people at a depth of reality and authenticity that is very rare in relationships. And I know the Bible contains Jesus' greatest hits, and I know there's many more stories that could be told about his relationships. And I'm sure when he went to a restaurant, he wasn't always on, he was always on, but not in the same way that when he was with the woman caught in adultery, or talking to Peter, or the woman at the well, or any of those greatest hits. He wasn't always like that. But those stories of his interaction with people are an indication and demonstration to us that we should demythologize how we engage with one another and engage them in an authentic way. Okay? And a great example of that is the gospel from this morning, the amazing catch of fish. And I want to talk about that a bit in about 5 minutes. But I want to tell you another story, and it's the story about authenticity. A long time ago, I guess it's about almost 2 decades ago now, more than 2 decades ago, I led a conference in Ottawa Diocese. And one of the things about leading a church conference is if you do a good job, your name goes around, because people are always looking for conference leaders, especially youth leaders, and I did a pretty good job. And so it's very flattering to the ego, I gotta tell you. I got requests for conferences, like quite a number of conferences. And one that I got was from the Diocese of Western Newfoundland. And I was very attracted to that one for a couple of reasons. One was my mother was a Newfie, and I'd never been to Newfoundland. And so it was a chance to go back to the Rock and visit the homeland, the motherland. And so I accepted this invitation from the bishop to lead a conference, a renewal conference in his diocese, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. But I knew I was supposed to talk about God, that's easy, and renewal, that's easy, and personal commitment, that's easy, and moving forward in our faith, that's easy too, The follow-up is where it gets tough. The initial point is where it's easy. The follow-up is where it gets tough. So I accepted the invitation, and the conference arrives. Well, usually at conferences, there's one evening that's dedicated to social activity. And I gotta tell you, Newfies have a reputation for being good socializers. Well earned, well earned. Normally, you have quiche, like churches and quiche, hand in hand. If communion wasn't reenacting the Last Supper, we'd be using quiche, because that's the way churches are. The Newfie, no, not in Newfoundland, didn't have any quiche. It was much more Newfie fare. And at churches, you sip sherry. Not at this Newfie conference. There was a lot more than sherry at the, there wasn't any sherry. There was a lot different than sherry at this Newfie conference. And church activities usually finish up, at the latest 9 o'clock, because everybody's got to go home, because they usually have it on Saturday night, and everybody wants to be in church bright and early the next day, so they want to be in bed. So they finish around 9 o'clock. Not a Newfie party. It started to slow down, I think, around 11 o'clock, and by 1 o'clock it was still going. And I'm going to say this, and it's almost biblical. The party was going to go on as long as the wine held out, is my memory of the event. But the tone of the party changed. It went from songs and dancing and stuff like that. It was a really fun party, great group of people. I made a hit because I taught myself Eyes the Bye on guitar. And the fact that this guy from away, from the mainland, sang Eyes the Bye, that was a real hit. By the time the party mellowed out and started telling stories, it was a very different atmosphere. And one of the things that they did, it was a church thing after all, was start to talk about ministers and priests that they'd known. And they told a story of one minister that had come to the town that the conference was actually held in. And he'd been gone for quite a while, but boy, he was well remembered. And they really loved him as a priest. They loved him as a priest. They had a lot of time from this priest. And so you're there thinking, it must be because he was a spectacular preacher. No, it had nothing to do with his preaching. They didn't talk about his preaching. Well, maybe he was a wonderful pastor. Maybe he was good at visiting and getting it, nothing to do with they didn't talk about his pastoring. Obviously, then it must be because he was a wonderful liturgist on Sunday mornings. He could put together a service, and it was a glorious service. No, had nothing to do with his liturgical style. They didn't say anything about that. What they said was this: when he came to town, when he was inducted as minister of the church, within a very short period of time, he went down to the dock, because of course we're on the coast and it's a fishing town. He went down to the dock and spoke to, I don't know how many, of the captains of the fleet, and joined a fishing trawler for one of their 5-day excursions to catch fish. Because in his mind, the only way he could be priest to this group of people is if he understood them and understood how they lived. And so for him, that meant going out on one of the boats and hauling fish and gutting fish and getting them to market. And years later, when these people told the story of this priest, I'm sure there were many, many other things they could have said. But the thing they said was that he went and he became part of their lives because he wanted to understand them. You see, he didn't want to do a Susan Day or David Cassidy. You know, he didn't want to have a mythology about them. He wanted to become a part of their life and who they are. And when we look at Jesus, that's what we see. That's what we see. We see someone who literally could have pulled a rabbit out of his hat. Like, come on, let's face it, he's Jesus. He could have pulled a rabbit out of his hat. Look what I could do, folks. He could have walked around with a holy glow and a holy aura. He could have done it. But it ain't so. That's not what he did. What he did was he became part of people's lives. Think of today. He's the gospel for today. He's been preaching, and then he goes to some fishermen. And I got to tell you, preaching is fun, but it is tiring. Sunday afternoon is called clergy nap time in Canada. The crowd was pressing on him. And so he approached a couple of fishermen, see, fish tie-in here, and said, let's go out. And so they offer him hospitality. They take him out in their boats. Maybe they think they're going to be paid. Maybe, who knows what they know? Who knows what they know of Jesus? Maybe they'd heard of him by reputation. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe they knew that he was an itinerant rabbi. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they knew he was the carpenter, son of the carpenter. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they knew him as Mary's boy. Maybe they didn't. We don't know. Okay, it's just not in the record. But they let him come into the boat. And he said, let's go out a ways. I wonder if they had known how far out Jesus was going to get them to take him, they would have been quite so enthusiastic about welcoming him on board. Anyway, so Jesus goes out in the boat, and then he says to these fishermen, guys, lower your nets. And these fishermen know their trade. You know, they know their trade. And so they say to him, Lord, we've been fishing the whole night and we haven't caught anything. Now isn't the time. Okay, let me tell you, I've been watching a series on Netflix that's on trawlers, fishing trawlers. And one of the things, it just amazes me, they put out gill nets that are 3 kilometers long. This is hard work. This is not easy putting out nets, Clearly their net wouldn't have been 3 kilometers long, but putting out a fishing net in order to be effective at catching fish, it's got to be pretty big. Big, heavy, awkward, cumbersome, smelly, hurts, et cetera, et cetera. We were fishing all night. We didn't catch a thing. We just got the net in, and now you're telling us the fish are going to be at the bottom because it's the heat of day. We're not going to. But okay, why they said okay, I have no idea, and the biblical record doesn't know why. Maybe it was something in the way Jesus said it. Maybe they were desperate. Maybe that was their livelihood, and so they threw out the net. And then after who knows how much time elapses, they pull it in and they have trouble getting it on board because it's so full of fish. Catching fish at the wrong time. So they have to call over another boat. And the biblical record says, maybe a little hyperbole, maybe not, who knows. But it makes for a good story. Newfies like good yarns too. That there were so many fish that the boats began to sink. We're being told something here, that something supernatural is taking place, something that transcends the natural. You know? When we read the story, we get it because we have the whole story. The people that were living it at the moment, who knows what was going on in their mind at that point? Well, we know what was going on in Peter's mind. He was a fisherman. He knew when was the right time to catch fish. He knew when was the wrong time to catch fish. And he would have known something else. He would have known where the fish were, and he would have known what a good average catch was. Okay? This was his trade. And let's not forget that. He was a skilled fisherman. And I don't want to overlook that because that forms part of the story and that forms part of his response. So he looks at the boat. He's brought in the net. And his boat and the other boat, again, a supernatural catch of fish. So he knows that something very unusual, something very strange has happened here. And so he looks at Jesus and says, interesting, depart from me, I'm a sinful man. Wow. He realizes he's in the presence of the purveyor of supernatural events, whom we call Lord, because only someone like that can do supernatural events. So, depart from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. And isn't it interesting, and doesn't it say something to us, that when Peter is confronted by the divinity of Christ, two things. One, it's in his court. It's in his field. Jesus doesn't say, "Come hither and watch me be holy. I'll glow. I'll grow wings for you and impress you." No, Jesus goes into Peter's territory and does something that Peter and the other fishermen would understand because it's so much a part of who they are inside. Jesus engages the authentic Peter, thinking back to the Partridge Family thing, stars and celebrity versus who these people are authentically. Jesus engages with the authentic Peter. We can learn many things from this, but at least two takeaways. First, the thing that Jesus engages with people at the level of the authentic, and therefore, as bearers of his light, we are called to engage with people at the level of the authentic them. This could be a real digression, so I'm going to just throw it in, but I could develop it a lot, and I'd like to actually. There was a Jewish existentialist philosopher by the name of Martin Buber, who did a book called my course was called The I Thou Question. He says we treat people in three ways. We treat them either as I, it, I, you, or I, thou. I, it is when we objectify people. Okay, so when we fantasize about a celebrity, it's an it. When you go to a restaurant and without looking up from your menu, you say, "Give me a," and a Coke. You're treating that person as an it. When you take time to get to know somebody, a little something about them, etc., 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 a little bit about their life, you're treating them as a you. When you get to know who they really are, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, their joys, their sorrows, when you're at the level of relationship where you hold their head when they're throwing up with the flu, then you're creeping into the territory of the thou. And Jesus calls us to engage people as he engaged people, which is at the level of the thou. And whenever you do engage somebody at the level of the thou, at that level of authenticity, you'll get to know their soul. You'll get to know their soul. You'll get to know them in ways that you never, ever thought imaginable. The other thing is, the second takeaway. When Peter experienced this, he wasn't led to worship. He would later, but he wasn't led to worship. What he was led to do was he wanted to make a separation between himself and the person who he was calling Lord, you know. Why? Because I'm sinful. So his understanding was that his brokenness, his sinfulness, his fallenness, whatever words you want to use, and you can use some nice contemporary words too, some of them are very, very useful, didn't cause him to run to God. It caused him to want to push God away. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people who you may not even know you know them, but you know them, who have pushed God away because they're full of shame, or they're full of guilt, or a sense of unworthiness. That far from wanting God to come into their bloody mess, no, God, you don't want to see this. Because they really don't believe that anyone could want to care for them in that way. As Jesus' light bearers, we're called to demonstrate that, yeah, well, you know what? We do want to care for you in that way. We do want to know you in that way. So what do we do with all this? Well, very briefly, back to the series I was watching on Netflix, these trawler guys. There's one scene where they've put down one of the 3-kilometer gill nets, and they leave it, for a while, and they go off and lay another one, and they come back in the middle of the night looking for it. And you see the guys standing on deck with these incredibly powerful handheld spotlights, because of course the gill nets, they have buoys that have flags with reflective tape, and they're scanning the ocean for one of these buoys with a flag and reflecting tape so they can get back their gill net. Well, at the risk of sounding cheesy, I hate sounding cheesy, but sometimes it works. In our baptism and in our profession of faith, we've been given the light. We've received the light. We've been given a spotlight. And our job, one of our jobs as Christians, is to hold that spotlight, to scan the horizon and see what lights up. See what lights up. Because that's the person, or those are the people that God is giving us responsibility for. I hope that makes sense to you. So my message today is a couple of things. One, authenticity. We're in a society that just runs from authenticity, wants anything, and well, the cult of the celebrity. I mentioned it, and you note how I avoided making any political allusions, but the cult of the celebrity. And you know what? Sometimes when you worship something and you actually get it, you discover that you didn't want it after all. And the cult of the celebrity, I think, is one of those things. And then I said that Jesus encounters us at the point of authenticity, at the deepest who we are. And then by pointing out that Peter's response was not, praise God, for the catch of fish. It was, depart from me, I'm a sinful man. You know that he was hidden at his core. And I suggest that in that story is a model for us as to how we should live our lives as bearers of Jesus' light. to engage people at the point, well, we've got to be authentic ourselves, and sometimes that's a challenge, but at the point of authenticity, not at the point of celebrity, however that appears in our. And to back that up, I gave you a story of a priest in Newfoundland who won over his people, not by his brilliant preaching or his marvelous pastoring or his spectacular liturgics, but because he got on a fishing boat and went out and caught fish and gutted fish. He met people where they actually lived. When we do that, when we live like that, we are being followers of Christ, we are being Christ's disciples, and we are also being Christ's missioners. When we do that, we build the church. Now let's pray.
Amen.
God, there is so much in our society today that is saccharine, that is phony, that is really attractive, but leads in all sorts of weird places. Think of everything that's floating around on the internet and YouTube, and some of it's really good and helpful, but man, oh man, it's easy to get lost and confused. And we're living in a generation of lost and confused people. Not everybody, but certainly a lot. So, in our lives and in our time, let your light shine. Transform us so that we could be your agents of transformation. God, please make us, through the working of your Spirit, more Christ-like, but also more like Peter as well, willing to engage who he truly was. And then send us to be healers. In Jesus' name, amen.